Hey there, it's Jenny McGarvey, and I am here today with how I planned in my weekly and my daily layout in my Wonderland 222 planner. So first I'm going to tackle the weekly and then I will go jump right into the dailies. I'm using this washi tape and these flake stickers with art from Eric Small Things as the basis of my weeks, meaning the bulk of it. Like, it won't be the only thing I use, but it will be a large percentage of what I use. I like to put the washi at the top and the bottom of the weekly view. It feels like a sort of like framing it, if that makes sense, giving it a solid bottom and a solid top. And honestly, I just like using cute washi, so it's kind of a win-win, right? I really do struggle with using the weekly view since I am a daily person in planning. I really like a space for daily plans because it allows me to write literally all the things. And so weekly, I really wanted to find a good use for the weekly, and I feel like this is working well for me. I'm writing work, due dates, things that need to be done, and then also using it as a social media planner. And that seems to be working really well. It gives me one spot for all of those, I'll say, important things for, like I said, work and social media. I like to sort through the individual stickers so that I can get a good balance throughout the week of what I use. I'm not always perfect at making sure that I use them intentionally. I sometimes just get a little bit carried away and forget, but for the most part, doing it and sorting it like that really does help. Now I'm using this washi tape at the top. It's a grid and it's kind of a grayish light blue. And honestly, I really love this washi because A, I love grids. B, the color is so pretty to me. And then C, it's really inexpensive. And so it just seems like it almost makes me giddy because like I'm so excited about the combination of all three things being awesome. Anyway, I will use the little emoticons to highlight the calls and posts and things like that, and then also to for the social media as well. And also this week I'm going to Chicago Stationery Fest, so I'm just going to add those at the top and the bottom too, just so that I can plan my work around those flights and that trip. Now you can see at the bottom, I'm adding the Instagram and the YouTube because as I told you at the beginning of the year, I was going to try to ramp up here a little bit. And so yeah, I'm adding those down across the bottom. It gives my eye a good, like I know where to look for that information, like the posts, for example. I don't follow this religiously though. So it's kind of a guideline, like a best case scenario. Everything goes according to plan. I will post these things on this day. And again, they're just reminders for me as well. So I'm not spelling out the entire thing because I don't need that. Having the reminder there is good enough. So I will just write those down there. But again, it doesn't mean that it's for sure going to be that way. It may or may not end up being that. So, yeah. Now, this is how I have swatched my fountain pen inks. And so I like to refer back to this to decide what colors to use. Obviously, I don't specifically have to have that because I'm not so super concerned about it being matchy matchy. What I am a little bit more concerned about is using lots of the colors that I have in my stash. So as you can see here, I have a lot of samples of ink and I want to use them. I don't want to only use the same inks over and over and over again. And so referring to my swatches helps me remember, oh yeah, this one's really pretty. I want to use this one. That's kind of where I'm at with it. I don't need it to be identical or anything like that. At the LA Pen Show recently, I got my first Sailor fountain pen and I really like it a lot. Like the nib size is perfect. So that's what I've decided is probably for right now my favorite is a Japanese broad nib. I'm finding that the European ones are getting a little bit broad for me, and so I'm super excited about these sailor nibs. They're gorgeous. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm swapping the ink in these pens, and I am not a purist, big shock, right? So what I like to do is I just put the extra ink back in the container, then I rinse out the pen thoroughly, dry it off. I make sure that there's no, like it's not still showing the color or anything like that in the nib, and then I am good to go on adding another color. I know a lot of people don't do this. They don't put the ink back in the bottles because they don't want any cross contamination whatsoever. But I'm really honestly not concerned with that. I'm not bothered by it, first of all. And second of all, I really just haven't had any instances where I feel like doing this way has changed the color of the ink significantly or anything like that. So I'm perfectly okay with this. So that's what I do is I just rinse it thoroughly, wipe it off, and then you can tell on the paper towel that if there's still a little bit of like the colored water in the nib that's still the old color, I just haven't had a problem with it. I also am a big fan of ink samples. I know not everyone is, but because I like to change my inks so often, it is a way that makes sense for me, not only for cost, but also for storage of all of those inks. Like, I would also just feel really bad if I had all of these inks that I really wasn't using. So that's why samples work out great for me. The other part that I love about samples is that I have absolutely purchased samples of inks that I thought that I would love, and then I really did not. And in fact, I really don't want to use them. So I'd be pretty bummed if I spent 20 bucks on a bottle of ink that I don't want to use, not because $20 is the end of the world or anything like that. I would just feel bummed that I had inks that I wasn't really going to use. I would obviously just give them away to people in samples or, that type of thing. But I would much rather just buy samples, make sure I really love it before I commit to a full bottle. This is my current favorite fountain pen too, this Sailor. It is so, so, so cute, and I absolutely love it. Now, what's funny to me too about inks is that I feel like just like every other supply, I go through situations where, oh my gosh, this is my favorite, but I love to say right now because, for example, this light blue that I'm writing with right now, it was definitely a favorite for there for a minute, and I definitely still like it, but I don't love it as much as I remember loving it in the past. So it's just always interesting to me how my preferences change just for no good reason. Maybe it's the pen since I haven't used this ink in this pen before, but yeah, I think it's a an interesting look at how quickly like I said, my preferences change. So I'm just drawing little boxes around the outside. I wasn't really in love with the way that those flight information wasn't really standing out. So I wanted to go ahead and draw the box around it just so it gave it a little bit more pop and a little bit more dimension since I added it because I wanted to see it. So made sense to add the little box around the outside. So now I'm going to fill in the social media aspects of the bottom part. And again, like I said already, these are not definitive. It's not like, oh my gosh, I absolutely must post this. I mean, I suppose at some point there could possibly be that, but for me, it's really not that. This is just a guideline for the most part. Like I said, if there was something that it was a must, I would post it that day, but otherwise I just use it for a guideline. I am alternating ink colors on this page. I don't typically do this in my dailies. Like I usually have one ink color for the plans or the appointments that I have, and then I use another color for my lists just to, keep it different. Like quickly my eye can differentiate that. But in this particular week, it's a little bit, the whole thing is a little bit different. So I'm just alternating the ink colors just because I want to. Now I decided that I wanted to add another line around the outside of this boxes to make them look a little bit more finished, like polished. And so I'm adding a secondary line and I do like it. This is actually sort of like fun to do. And then I do like the result. I don't know that I'm going to start doing this for absolutely everything or anything, but I do like the way that it looks and it was fun to do. So I do have to just be a little bit more careful since the fountain pen ink dries definitely more slowly than just your average pen. And certainly for me than my felt tip pens that I ordinarily use. So something for me to keep in mind. So now I want to lay out these stickers that I'm going to use at least on the right hand side. And I love these. I think they're so cute. I think Eric Smallthing's art is just so adorable. It makes me happy is really kind of what the story is. So I just love using these. Brings me a lot of joy to look in my planner, and that's definitely motivational for me to keep referring back to the planner, if that makes sense, and it keeps me functional. So I do enjoy that as well. I'm just going to layer a couple of these down here on this side because I have a couple of smaller individual stickers. I mean, not significantly smaller, but they're slightly smaller than the other ones. So I'm going to sort of layer those together over here to create a cluster, if you will. Look how cute that art is, right? And I love the pop of red too, especially since the rest of the page is fairly blue. And then you have that faux wax seal that is red, and I think that turns out really adorable. Super cute, right? I mean, it's very, very, very simple, but it's really meant to be functional. So that's one of the things that I am liking about this is that it is just a whole lot of function. Now we're going to flow right back into the dailies for the same week. And so I'm going to use the same stickers just because I want to. I don't ordinarily do that. I normally shake it up just to make sure that there's no confusion on my part. But, I don't want to do that this week. I want to use the same stickers. So I'm going to. And I'm going to use the same washi that I used at the bottom of the weekly along the edges. And honestly, this washi is amazing for this. Like, this is so good. I'm loving it. It is a little bit wider than your average roll of washi, and that's also like a good thing. Like, it makes this whole process a little bit easier, which I'm always up for anything that makes things a little bit easier. I add the washi to the sides of the pages just because I like it. There's no real rhyme or reason. It's very, very satisfying after several weeks or months to see all the different colors on the edge of the paper. And yeah, it's a fun detail. I know it's, kind of 2017 or whatever, but I really like it. And so I decided to do it again this year after looking back at some of my old planners that had it. Like, it brought me such joy. It is kind of a time-consuming task. I mean, relatively speaking, it takes what, 5 minutes or something, but in comparison to some other things, especially because it's not quote unquote necessary. Again, I mean, obviously decorative planning isn't particularly necessary anyway, but I love it. And it also is a good way to use washi because lots of us have lots of rolls of washi. And so this is a very satisfying and enjoyable way to use up some of that washi tape. Like I said already, I'm not always very good at it. Like, sometimes it gets a little bit like not perfectly laid out, or I sort of, you know, bend the page a little bit or something like that. But in the end, it really doesn't matter. And I always try to remember that like at the end of the week, I barely even noticed where it was in the first place. So yeah, so once I get all the washi down, I feel very, very satisfied. And then I like to go and add the dates. I am currently using this roller date stamp. It's an older one from my stash from Coco Daisy. And I like this because I like to stamp the dates. I don't love to use stickers because if I used stickers in that same spot over and over and over again, then the planner gets bulky in that one spot. And so I try to not use stickers, not exclusively. I will use a sticker if I have perfect date stickers, like I really want to use those, or if I'll say in a hurry, but this honestly hardly takes any time. I'm using a piece of blotting paper. If you pay attention a lot, you've seen this. It's always kind of in my planner or nearby to my planner, and it's a total disaster. It's essentially very close to the same texture as like construction paper, like that children use, and it just helps exactly what it sounds like, blot up excess ink. Sometimes when I stamp those, if the ink isn't completely dry, it will smear onto the other page, and for some reason, that's super irritating to me. If you've been here a minute, you know that I'm mostly pretty laid back about most stuff, but for whatever reason, that's kind of a trigger for me. So the blotting paper just helps with that. I can also pull out my heat tool, and you will see me do that. But this, the amount of wetness is minimal. So I don't really feel like pulling out my heat tool for that minimal amount of ink. So the blotting papers work really well. However, I would have absolutely tried construction paper had I realized that that's what this feels like, if that makes sense. Like before I bought blotting papers, not that they're expensive or anything like that. So I'm going ahead and writing in the days of the week with my brush pen. Again, I don't, this is the same thing. I typically usually stamp these just to keep them flat and not have the bulk from stickers, because then again, you imagine these two corners are really bulky by having the dates there. But this week I just decided that I felt like writing them, and so I did. For me, I'm a big believer in switching things up for me. I know some people really like to keep things very, very consistent and do the same thing over and over again. I do not. I'm the opposite. Like I constantly sort of want to be evolving and changing. It's just part of how my brain works. I crave that. And so, for example, this week I decided that I wanted to try some handwritten headers specifically like this because I see other people that do that and I think that they look fantastic. Spoiler alert, I hate these and I don't even leave them. That's how much I hate them. Because if you've been here again a minute, you know that typically I just say, oh, it's just one day or it's just one week or whatever. It's no big deal. I'll live with it. Yeah, no, I hate this and I cannot live with it. So it doesn't stay. Yeah, I have to get rid of it at pretty much any cost. So there's that. But then under the schedule section, because I usually have these sections of schedule, work, to do, and dinner. Those are the things, the sections that I want in my daily plans. I like to meal plan for multiple reasons. I like to have that as a resource for future me because looking back at like, oh, what are other things I've made in the past because I tend to fall into ruts, I think, as we mostly do. And so then being able to flip back to some like what we had for dinner 3 months ago is a huge help. I obviously like to keep track of the work tasks that I need to complete that day. I like to keep track of home tasks, which is the to do section. And then obviously, I like to keep track of appointments and activities and things like that. So that's where my four sections come in. And then that leaves me room for decorativeness. It leaves me room for brain dumps. I don't need the pages to be full to feel like this planner is effective and working well for me. There are some days that I feel like a little like, oh, I wish there was more on this page. But because it's not as pretty when there's not as much written on it. But what I will say is that I do not need there to be a ton of things written on the page for me to feel like this is really working well for me. What I need is a space that when my brain needs it, a place that I can just list all of the things. That's really important for my brain to not sort of feel out of control. I need to know that I wrote it down somewhere. That means that I will refer back to it and then I have the possibility of getting it done. Doesn't mean I will always get it done. It just means that I won't forget about it, which is my fear that I will forget about things. So, all right, so I've already decided that I'm going to go ahead and stamp the rest of those. See, I'm covering them up. Can't stand them. Decided right away. Yeah, no, don't love them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cover these with this correcting tape and I'm not being stressed about it, if that makes sense. I'm going to cover it up, but I'm just going to then use normal stickers to write the headers. Like I'm not going to go crazy making sure that I cover all that tape or anything like that. And then the rest of the week, I'm just going to stamp because I know that it's neat, tidy. And again, in a perfect world, I would have, I don't know what, because I never feel completely like these are the perfect things, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect to be really, really useful, if that makes sense. So I try to remind myself of that anyway. So again, the stamps that I use say schedule, today, to do, and dinner. The today means home tasks that I hope to get done on that particular day. However, I don't get too stressed about that if things don't get done. I simply transfer them to the next day or a future date. It's really just not that big of a deal to me. So you can see I use the heat tool fairly extensively to dry those inks. The Versacolor inks are wonderful because they don't really have any bleed or shadowing on the other side of the paper. However, they take forever to dry. So usually I have to use the heat tool because there's really no other way to use these inks and be able to move on in a timely fashion. So luckily, the heat tool works really, really well, and I keep mine very close to my desk basically at all times. So it's easy to reach for, and I just use that. So I get that it's not something that maybe everybody wants to do, but it is a means to an end in terms of with Tomoe River paper, it's so sensitive to bleeding and shadowing. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, that's not true. I don't have that problem. I totally get that. But it's just it's finicky, right? Like, it's not just like every other paper. So, for me, I don't want, obviously, any bleed through, and I would prefer minimal, if any, shadowing whatsoever. And honestly, these Versamagic ink pads totally do the trick. So, they work great. Now I need to go back and add some sort of headers for those days that I had to eradicate what I had written. So I don't have a ton of these types of functional stickers because I don't want them typically, right? Like I recognize the bulk situation in a Tomoe River paper. And when I was using the teacher planner, I didn't want to have like 5 million stickers that said the exact same thing over and over and over again. So that's why I just don't really have that many in my stash. And it's fine because I don't normally need them. So I just pulled out some random Happy Planner stickers that they don't truly fit. Like they say remember. I mean, obviously I want to remember that, but I just it's fine. It's totally fine. It's just 2 days. 2 days that I already sort of jacked up anyway, so I'm just making the best of it. And yeah, moving on. And I think that'll be fine, and it's a good lesson that just because I see things that are beautiful in other people's planners doesn't mean that I will be able to make that happen, right? So I may love seeing it for other people, but it's just not going to work for me. And that's okay. That's honestly okay. Like it sounds silly or like I'm trying to convince myself of that. I'm not at all. Yeah, it's just not going to work for me and other things work for me that don't work for other people. So it's cool, it's a balance, and just remembering that this planner, while I want it to be cute for me to refer back to, it's ultimately a productivity tool. And when I say productivity, I don't mean it in the way of like hustle culture. I mean it in the way of these are the things that I must do in order to have a semblance of a I could insert a whole bunch of adjectives here, but happy, you know, life, things that I want to get done because I want to continue to live the way that I do. So for me, I find that having either a 8.5 by 11 teacher type planner where I can literally like just list out all the things, or something like this, these A5 daily pages where I can just sort of write down all the things that are on my brain are kind of necessary. And that's why this A5 planner works better for me than the teacher planner. Not that the teacher planner doesn't work, because it works really well. But the part about it that doesn't work as well is that there's not sort of a built-in space for a brain dump versus here, like, okay, if Saturday doesn't have very much stuff on it, I can just write brain dump and then like write all the things down. And I recognize that and appreciate it for what that is, if that makes sense. So, like, when I look back on it, I know that that list on Saturday maybe didn't even happen on Saturday, but I know that I needed a space to get all of the things out of my head onto paper. And for me, that is just beautiful, not because I need to be that way. That's not what I mean. I wish that I wasn't this way. But it's beautiful in that I get to have a planner that serves me really well. And then there is room for me to do these brain dumps that keeps me on track because it's still in the same spot as my everyday plans, if that makes sense. So, would I rather be able to have one of these beautiful planners like everybody else uses that's really tidy and neat and aesthetic and all of that? I mean, I guess, but in some ways, this sort of mishmash hodgepodge is really just, it brings me joy because I know that it helps my particular brain do life in a way that works. So, yeah. All right, so these stickers are great. I love them. They're gorgeous. However, with that said, I again occasionally have a hard time getting them peeled off the backing. It's not the sticker's fault. It's just me, and I'm not really necessarily looking for any hacks or tips or whatever. I just, it's one of those things. So I don't want you to think that like, "Oh my God, these stickers aren't good stickers." No, they're great stickers, and the washi texture is really cool, and obviously, the art is super cute, and then the ones that have gold foil, like, that's special too. I struggle with it personally, and I'm okay with that, so that really is kind of all that matters because I think that we all get to do these things the way that work for us, and I think we shouldn't have to be apologetic about that, or I don't wanna say feel bad about it, but, like, sometimes, right? Like, I see that somebody else can do something so beautifully, pull the backing off of stickers, for example, and I feel like I should be able to do that, but then I have to remind myself, "Yeah, I probably could," like, if I devoted myself to finding a good way to do that, but I also just one of these days, I'll figure it out, that's cool, and until then, yeah, I do what I do, and other people do what they do, right? So now I'm going to just write down all of the plans for Sunday, which is flying home from the pen show. I'll have to admit, a video of this length is really, it's a lot to talk about this planning process for this long. So my hat's off to people who typically do videos that are this long. This is absolutely a lot of brain power to think about a video that's over 30 minutes long. And you may not agree or whatever, but I'm sitting here thinking, wow, this is a lot. I really can respect the people that are doing this for lengthier videos since most of mine are definitely at least half this long. So, yeah. These little coffee monsters, guys, are so cute. And I know that her stickers are so popular, but I really just, they bring me joy, like their little faces and stuff. They're so cute. All right. So I use the heat tool too sometimes to dry the fountain pen ink, not because it takes an exorbitant amount of time. It just takes more time than I'm probably, I don't know, sometimes capable of giving, like, if that makes sense. Like, sometimes I just need to move on or that type of thing, and so I will often forget. So using the heat tool really works for me. So now I needed to go back and add the lettering for the Chicago Stationery Fest. I completely forgot that I wanted to do this here, and so I'm just adding this at the end with a dual brush pen because they are really fantastic pens. So that is it for me this week. I hope you enjoyed this look into my planning process. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll do my best to get back to you. Thanks so much and make it a great day.